The desperate gamble. The eviction notice felt like sandpaper in Marcus Chen's hands. 30 days. That's all he had left before losing his apartment and what remained of his dignity. His architectural firm had collapsed 6 months ago, taking his savings, his reputation, and his confidence with it. He sat in his cramped studio, surrounded by blueprints for buildings that would never exist, drowning in $40,000 of debt that grew larger every day. The phone calls from creditors had become background noise, a symphony of financial ruin he'd learned to ignore. "You can't be serious about this," his younger sister Jade said, standing in his doorway with her arms crossed. She'd just heard his plan, and her face showed exactly what she thought of it. Marcus didn't look up from his laptop screen, which displayed a Society page article about Victoria Harrington's recent donation to the city's art museum. Widow of real estate mogul Robert Harrington, estimated worth $23 million. No children, one nephew, lives alone in the Harrington estate on Willow Hill. "I don't have a choice," Marcus replied, his voice hollow. "I've applied to 67 jobs in 3 months. Nobody wants an architect whose last project ended in a lawsuit. So you're going to prey on some lonely old woman instead." Jade's voice cracked with disappointment. "This isn't you, Marcus. When did you become this person?" He finally met her eyes. "When the bank threatened to seize everything. When I couldn't afford groceries last week. When I realized pride doesn't pay bills." He closed the laptop. "She's hosting a gallery opening Friday night. Benefits the Children's Hospital. Tickets are $500. Money you don't have. I'll put it on the credit card." "What's another $500 when I already owe $40,000? The laugh that escaped him was bitter. "Besides, I did some research. Victoria Harrington attends these events alone. She likes architecture. Her late husband collected books on historical buildings. She's been a widow for 4 years. Jade shook her head slowly. "And you think you can just, what? Charm your way into her life? Marry her for money like some kind of con artist? I think I can offer companionship to someone who's probably lonely." Even as he said it, Marcus felt the words ring hollow. People marry for worse reasons. People marry for love, Marcus. People with options marry for love. He stood up, straightening his shoulders with false confidence. "People like me marry for survival." The gallery opening arrived cold and clear, the kind of autumn evening that painted everything in golden light. Marcus wore his only good suit, the navy one he'd purchased for client meetings in better times. He'd skipped lunch to afford the dry cleaning. The gallery hummed with wealthy patrons who moved through the space like they owned it, which some of them probably did. Crystal glasses caught the light. Quiet conversations about art and politics floated through the air like expensive perfume. That's when he saw her. Victoria Harrington stood before a painting of a Victorian mansion. Her silver hair swept into an elegant twist. She wore a simple black dress that spoke of understated wealth, pearls at her throat. She wasn't traditionally beautiful, but there was something compelling in her face, intelligence perhaps, or a sadness that matched his own. She was also younger than he'd expected. Late 50s, maybe, with smooth skin and steady hands as she raised her wine glass. Marcus approached, his heart hammering. This was it. The moment that would either save him or confirm what a terrible person he'd become. "Fascinating perspective," he said, gesturing to the painting. The architect captured the asymmetry of Queen Anne style perfectly. Most people don't realize those towers were functional, not just decorative. Victoria turned, and her eyes, a startling shade of gray-blue, studied him with unexpected intensity. "You know architecture. I used to." The honesty surprised him. "I mean, I still do. I just don't practice anymore." A small smile touched her lips. "How does one stop being what they are?" The question hit harder than she could have known. Marcus found himself unable to deliver the rehearsed lines he'd practiced. Instead, he simply said, "Sometimes life makes that choice for you." "Victoria Harrington," she said, extending her hand. "Marcus Chen." Her handshake was firm, confident, not fragile at all. "Tell me, Marcus Chen, who used to be an architect, what brings you to an event like this?" Another moment for honesty when he should have been calculating. "Honestly, I'm here because I need something to believe in again. I saw this event supports the Children's Hospital. And I thought maybe being around people who still care about making things beautiful might remind me why I chose this field in the first place. Something shifted in Victoria's expression. That's the most honest thing anyone said to me in months. She gestured toward the bar. Would you like to continue this conversation somewhere less crowded? As they walked through the gallery together, Marcus felt the weight of his sister's judgment, the eviction notice in his pocket, and the desperate plan that had brought him here. He also felt something unexpected: guilt. Because Victoria Harrington wasn't what he'd imagined. She wasn't a lonely old woman waiting to be deceived. She was sharp, interesting, and somehow sad in a way that mirrored his own brokenness. And that, Marcus realized with growing dread, might make this even worse. The unexpected connection. The wedding happened on a gray morning in November, exactly 4 months after that gallery opening. It was a small ceremony at City Hall with only a handful of witnesses. Jade, who attended but barely spoke to Marcus. Victoria's nephew, Owen, whose jaw remained clenched throughout. And Mrs. Pemberton, Victoria's housekeeper of 20 years, whose disapproving stare could have frozen fire. Marcus signed his name on the marriage certificate and felt like he was signing away whatever integrity he had left. But the alternative was bankruptcy, homelessness, and complete ruin. He told himself this was a business arrangement. Victoria got companionship. He got financial security. Nobody was being hurt, except he couldn't shake the feeling that he was lying to himself. The Harrington estate sat on 3 acres of manicured grounds, a sprawling Georgian revival mansion that spoke of old money and older traditions. As Marcus pulled his battered sedan up the circular driveway on his first day as Victoria's husband, he felt distinctly out of place. His entire apartment could have fit in the entrance hall. "Your room is in the east wing," Victoria said matter-of-factly as Mrs. Pemberton carried his single suitcase up the grand staircase. "I thought you'd appreciate the morning light. There's a desk by the window if you want to work on your designs." "Separate rooms?" Marcus tried to hide his relief. Victoria's smile was knowing. "Marcus, let's not pretend this is a traditional marriage. You need stability. I need companionship and care as my health declines. We both know what this arrangement is." The bluntness should have made things easier. Instead, it made Marcus feel smaller. "Your health?" "Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Diagnosed 8 months ago. I've declined aggressive treatment." She said it the way someone might mention the weather. "I have perhaps 18 months, maybe 2 years if I'm fortunate." "I've made my peace with it." Marcus felt his stomach drop. He'd known she was a widow, known she lived alone, but he hadn't known she was dying. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Everyone dies, Marcus. I'm simply lucky enough to know my timeline." She walked toward the sitting room, gesturing for him to follow. "Now let's discuss expectations. I rise early and spend mornings in the garden when weather permits. I have doctor appointments twice monthly. I enjoy reading before bed, and I absolutely despise television except for old films." "Can you cook?" "Reasonably well." "Good. Mrs. Pemberton handles most meals, but she has Sundays off. I like simple food. Nothing too rich." Victoria settled into a chair by the window, and for the first time, Marcus noticed how carefully she moved, as if her body hurt. "I also want honesty between us. If this arrangement becomes unbearable, I expect you to tell me rather than simply enduring it for the money." "The money. Right. That's why he was here." "What do you expect from me?" Marcus asked. "Conversation, companionship, help when I need it, which will increase as time goes on. And perhaps most importantly, I expect you not to pity me. I'm dying, not dead. I still have thoughts, opinions, and a functioning mind." Her gray-blue eyes fixed on him. "Can you manage that?" "Yes," Marcus said, and meant it. The first week was awkward. Marcus felt like an actor who'd forgotten his lines, constantly unsure of his role. He worked on architectural sketches in his room, went for long walks on the estate grounds, and joined Victoria for dinners that were polite but strained. Owen visited twice, each time barely acknowledging Marcus's existence. Mrs. Pemberton's hostility was more open. She served Marcus his meals with the kind of precision that suggested she wished the plates were weapons. "Don't mind her," Victoria said one evening after Mrs. Pemberton had practically slammed Marcus's soup bowl on the table. "She loved my husband Robert. She thinks I'm betraying his memory by remarrying." "Are you?" The question escaped before Marcus could stop it. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her spoon paused halfway to her lips. Robert died 4 years ago after a long battle with Alzheimer's. The last 2 years he didn't recognize me. I fed him, bathed him, read to him, and he looked at me like I was a stranger. Her voice remained steady, but Marcus heard the pain beneath. I watched the man I loved disappear piece by piece. When he finally died, I felt relief, and that guilt has haunted me ever since. So no, Marcus, I don't think I'm betraying his memory. I think I'm trying to feel something other than guilt and loneliness before my time runs out. That night, Marcus lay in his expensive room in his enormous bed and stared at the ceiling. This was supposed to be simple. Marry a rich widow, wait out the inevitable, inherit enough to rebuild his life. But Victoria wasn't playing her part. She was supposed to be a means to an end, not a real person with real pain. The morning after, Marcus woke early and found Victoria in the garden. She wore dirt-stained gloves and knelt beside a rose bed, carefully pruning dead blooms despite the late season. The November air was crisp enough to show their breath. "I thought the gardeners handled this," Marcus said, approaching. "They handle the lawn, the trees, the hedges. The roses are mine." She sat back on her heels, studying her work. "Robert planted these for our 20th anniversary. White for truth, pink for gratitude, red for love. He was a romantic, my husband. Sentimental in ways that surprised people who only knew him as a ruthless businessman." Marcus knelt beside her, not quite sure why. "Tell me about him," and she did. For the next hour, as they worked side by side in the garden, Victoria talked about Robert, his terrible jokes, his love of old westerns, the way he'd sing off-key in the shower. She talked about their travels, their fights, the children they'd tried but failed to have. She talked about watching him fade, and the loneliness that followed. Marcus found himself talking too. About his failed firm, the lawsuit that hadn't been entirely his fault, but had destroyed his reputation anyway. About his father's disappointment before he died, about Jade's pity that hurt worse than anger. About the shame of not being able to support himself at 33. "Life is funny," Victoria said as they finished with the roses. "It breaks us in such specific ways." Something shifted that morning. Marcus couldn't name it, but it was there, a crack in the wall he'd built around this arrangement. The weeks that followed developed a rhythm. Breakfast together, reviewing Victoria's medications. Mornings in the garden when she felt well enough. Afternoons reading. Victoria preferred classics, everything from Austen to Hemingway, and she'd ask Marcus to read aloud when her eyes tired. He discovered she had opinions about everything, a sharp wit, and a surprising sense of humor that emerged once she trusted him. "You laugh like someone who's out of practice," she observed one afternoon after Marcus had cracked up at her dry commentary about a pretentious art critic's review. "I haven't had much to laugh about lately," he admitted. "Neither, have I?" Strange that we'd find it together. In December, Victoria had a bad week. The pain worsened, and Marcus found himself helping her in ways he hadn't anticipated, steadying her when dizziness struck, bringing medication in the night, sitting with her when she couldn't sleep. Mrs. Pemberton's. Hostility began to thaw as she watched him care for. "Victoria, without complaint, you're better than I expected," the housekeeper said grudgingly. One morning, as Marcus cleaned up after Victoria, had been sick. It wasn't much, but it felt like absolution. Christmas approached, and Victoria insisted on decorating despite her fatigue. Marcus found himself on a ladder hanging lights while she directed from a chair, wrapped in blankets. Owen stopped by with gifts, and his expression when he saw Marcus and Victoria laughing over tangled light strings was complicated, less hostile, more confused. "Why are you really here?" Owen asked Marcus later, when Victoria had gone to rest. Marcus could have lied. Should have lied. Instead, he said, "Initially, I needed money and stability. She needed care and company. It was transactional. And now?" Marcus looked toward the stairs where Victoria had gone, moving slower each day. "Now I'm not sure what it is, but it's not what it was." Owen studied him for a long moment. "She deserves better than someone who came for her money." "You're right," Marcus agreed. "She does." On Christmas morning, Victoria gave Marcus a gift, a leather-bound journal and an expensive set of architectural pencils. "For new beginnings," she said. "Stop designing buildings that will never be built. Design something impossible, something beautiful. Do it just because you can." Marcus gave her a restored first edition of Pride and Prejudice that he'd found at an estate sale, spending money he probably shouldn't have. Her eyes filled with tears when she opened it. "This was Robert's favorite," she whispered. "He used to read it to me when I couldn't sleep." "How did you know? You mention it more than any other book, and you smile differently when you talk about it." That night, as they sat by the fire, Victoria reached over and took Marcus's hand. It was the first time they'd touched beyond necessity. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what? For seeing me? Not the dying woman, not the wealthy widow, just me." Marcus squeezed her hand gently and felt something crack open in his chest. Something that felt dangerously close to real affection. He was falling for his wife. His dying wife. The woman he'd married for money, and he had absolutely no idea what to do about it. The transformation January arrived with bitter cold and a devastating realization for Marcus. He was in love with Victoria. It hadn't happened all at once. There was no single moment, no dramatic revelation. Instead, it had crept up on him through 1,000 small moments. The way she hummed while reading, her determination to tend her roses even when pain made her hands shake, the sharp intelligence in her observations about people, architecture, life itself. He was in love and it was too late, and it was entirely his fault. "You look troubled," Victoria said one morning at breakfast. Her appetite had decreased noticeably, but she still insisted on maintaining routines. "Want to talk about it?" "Just thinking about a design," Marcus lied. He'd actually been thinking about how much time she had left, and how every day with her felt both precious and like a countdown he couldn't stop. Victoria gave him a look that suggested she knew he was lying but wouldn't push. "Derek called this morning. He wants to have lunch with you." Derek Patterson had been Marcus's business partner before everything collapsed. They'd barely spoken since the firm dissolved, their friendship another casualty of failure. "What does he want?" "I suspect he wants to understand why you married me," Victoria said with characteristic bluntness. "And possibly to determine if you've completely lost your mind." She wasn't wrong. Marcus met Derek at a downtown cafe, and his old friend's first words after they sat down were, "Have you completely lost your mind?" "Hello to you too." Derek leaned forward, voice low. "Marcus, everyone's talking. You married a woman 25 years older than you. A wealthy woman. A dying woman." He held up a hand when Marcus started to protest. "I'm not judging. I'm worried. This isn't you. How do you know what's me anymore?" Marcus stirred his coffee. "The me you knew had a successful firm and a future. That person doesn't exist. So you married her for money. I married her because I was desperate and she made me an offer that saved my life." Marcus met Derek's eyes. And yes, initially it was transactional, but it's not anymore. Derek's expression shifted from concern to disbelief. "You're not seriously telling me you've fallen for her." "Why is that so impossible to believe?" "Because you don't fall in love with someone in 4 months, Marcus. Especially not in a situation like this. You're confusing gratitude with affection, or you're telling yourself a story to justify what you're doing." The words stung because Marcus had wondered the same thing. Late at night, alone in his room, he questioned everything. Was this real? Or was he simply attached to the person who'd rescued him from ruin? But then he'd remember Victoria's laugh, the conversations that stretched for hours, the way she challenged him to be better than he'd been. And he knew, with uncomfortable certainty, that what he felt was real. "Believe what you want," Marcus said quietly. "I know the truth," Derek shook his head. "I hope you do, because when she's gone, you're going to have to live with whatever this is." That conversation haunted Marcus for days. It grew worse when Jade visited the estate for the first time since the wedding. She'd finally accepted his invitation, though her expression as she walked through the grand foyer suggested she was conducting an investigation rather than a family visit. Victoria joined them for tea in the sunroom, moving carefully but maintaining the grace that seemed innate to her. Jade watched everything, the way Marcus automatically moved a pillow to support Victoria's back, how Victoria's hand briefly touched his shoulder in thanks, the easy rhythm of their conversation. After Victoria excused herself to rest, Jade turned to Marcus with an expression he couldn't read. "You love her," she said. Not a question. Marcus felt exposed. "Yes? I came here ready to lecture you about being a gold digger, about how disappointed I was, how you'd become someone I didn't recognize." Jade's voice softened. "But I see the way you look at her, Marcus, and I see the way she looks at you. This isn't what I expected. It's not what I expected either. Does she know that you love her?" Marcus shook his head. "How can I tell her? She'll think I'm manipulating her, or that I'm confused, or that I'm trying to secure my place in her will. Any declaration of love in this situation looks calculated." "Or," Jade said gently, "she'll be happy. Have you considered that?" He hadn't, actually. Marcus had been so consumed by his own guilt and confusion that he hadn't imagined Victoria might welcome his feelings. But before he could explore that possibility, Victoria's situation took a darker turn. In February, Victoria collapsed in the garden. Marcus found her lying among the dormant rose bushes, conscious but disoriented. The ambulance ride to the hospital was the longest 20 minutes of his life. He held her hand the entire time, murmuring reassurances he didn't believe himself. The doctors increased her pain medication and suggested she consider hospice care. Victoria refused. "I want to be home," she told Marcus in her hospital room that night. "Whatever time I have left, I want to spend it in my house, in my garden with—" She paused. "With you." "I'm not going anywhere," Marcus promised. Owen arrived the next morning, and this time when he looked at Marcus, there was something new in his expression. Maybe respect, maybe just resignation. "The doctors say she has maybe 6 months. Probably less." Marcus felt the world tilt. 6 months. Half a year. 180 days, give or take. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. When Victoria came home 3 days later, Marcus transformed the ground floor study into a bedroom so she wouldn't have to navigate stairs. He moved his own things into the adjacent sitting room. Mrs. Pemberton didn't comment on this arrangement, but she brought him extra pillows and blankets without being asked. The weeks that followed were hard. Victoria had good days and bad days, and Marcus learned to read the subtle signs, how she held her body, the tightness around her eyes, the way she'd stop mid-sentence when pain spiked. He became expert at medication schedules, at making food she could tolerate, at being present without hovering, but they still had moments of grace. On good days, Victoria would sit in the sunroom while Marcus read to her. She'd started making comments about her life, her regrets, things she wished she'd done differently. "My daughter," she said one afternoon, catching Marcus off guard. He hadn't known she had a daughter. "I didn't know you had children?" "Diane. She's 43, lives in Seattle. We haven't spoken in 7 years." Victoria's voice was heavy with regret. "After Robert got sick, she wanted to put him in a facility. I refused. She said I was being stubborn and sacrificing my own life for a man who couldn't even remember me. She wasn't wrong, but I couldn't forgive her for saying it. We fought, and she left, and neither of us would bend enough to bridge the gap." "It's not too late," Marcus said. Victoria looked at him with sad eyes. "Isn't it? Not while you're still here. Not while there's still time to fix it." That night, Marcus did something he'd never done before. He went into Victoria's private study and found her address book. He found Diane's number and, without overthinking it, he called. The woman who answered had Victoria's voice, but sharper, more defensive. "Who is this?" "My name is Marcus Chen. I'm your mother's husband." A long pause. "I heard she remarried." "Some young gold digger, according to Owen." Marcus swallowed his pride. "I'm calling because your mother talks about you. She misses you. She's dying, Diane, and she has regrets, and I think you might have them too if you don't come see her before it's too late. She has months left. She has weeks, maybe days." The doctors were optimistic. Marcus heard his voice crack. "Please, whatever happened between you, don't let it end like this." Another pause. Then quietly, "Is she really dying?" "Yes. And you really care about her?" "This isn't about the inheritance?" Marcus thought about lying, about making himself sound noble. Instead, he told the truth. "I married her for money. I'm not proud of it, but that's how it started." "But I fell in love with her, Diane. Completely and hopelessly in love with a woman I can't save, and all I want is for her to be at peace before she goes." "And I don't think she can be at peace without you." He heard crying on the other end. "I'll catch a flight tomorrow." Diane arrived 2 days later, a woman who looked like Victoria might have at 40, with the same gray-blue eyes and determined chin. The reunion was emotional. Tears, apologies, painful honesty about hurt feelings and stubborn pride. Marcus gave them space, but later that night, Victoria called him into her room. "Thank you," she said, and Diane nodded in agreement. "Family shouldn't be broken," Marcus said simply. Over the next few weeks, as winter gave way to early spring, something beautiful happened. Diane visited regularly, sometimes staying for days. She and Marcus developed an easy rapport, bonding over their shared love for Victoria. Owen's visits became friendlier. Even Victoria's brother Harold, who Marcus had only met once at the wedding, started calling regularly. "You did this," Victoria said one evening as Marcus helped her into the garden to see the first spring blooms. "You brought my family back." They never really left. They were just waiting for permission to return. Victoria stopped walking and turned to face him. In the fading light, she looked younger, or maybe Marcus just saw her differently now. "You're a good man, Marcus Chen. Better than you think you are. I'm the man who married you for money and stayed for something else entirely." She touched his face gently. "I know, Marcus. I've known for weeks, maybe months." The end, Part 1. The farewell. The morning Victoria died, the world was unreasonably beautiful. Spring had arrived in full force, painting the estate in colors that seemed too vibrant, too alive for what was about to happen. Marcus had carried Victoria to her favorite bench in the rose garden just after dawn, wrapped in blankets despite the mild temperature. She'd insisted. "I want to see them bloom one more time," she'd said, her voice barely above a whisper. The pain medication made everything distant for her now, but she'd been adamant about this. "Robert planted them. I tended them. They should be the last thing I see." So Marcus sat beside her on that bench, his arm around her shoulders, supporting her weight as she grew weaker with each passing hour. The roses were just beginning to open, white for truth, pink for gratitude, red for love. Diane was there too, sitting on Victoria's other side, holding her mother's hand. Owen had gone inside to call Harold, but he returned quickly, as if afraid to miss anything. Mrs. Pemberton stood on the patio, her weathered face wet with tears she didn't bother to hide. "Tell me about your building," Victoria murmured to Marcus. Over the past weeks, he'd been designing something new, not a practical structure for a client, but something impossible and beautiful, exactly as she'd suggested that Christmas. A library that spiraled toward the sky, all glass and light, with gardens at every level. "It's almost finished," Marcus said, his voice thick. 7 stories, each one representing a different kind of knowledge. The top floor is all windows so readers can see the clouds. "Will you build it?" "Probably not. It's not practical. The engineering would be a nightmare." Victoria smiled. "Build it anyway. Make people say it can't be done, then do it anyway." Her breathing was labored now, each word an effort. "Promise me." "I promise." She was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus thought maybe she'd slipped into unconsciousness. But then she squeezed his hand with surprising strength. "I need to tell you something," she said. "About the will. Victoria, that doesn't matter. It matters to me. Listen." She drew a shallow breath. "I've left instructions, a video, things I couldn't say while alive because I didn't want to influence you, didn't want you to stay for the wrong reasons." Marcus felt cold despite the sun. "What kind of instructions?" "The kind that will make sense when you hear them. The kind that will tell everyone what I saw in you, what you became." She turned her head slightly to look at him, and her gray-blue eyes were clear for just a moment. "You saved me, Marcus. Not from death, that was always coming, but from dying alone and unloved. You gave me something beautiful at the end. That's worth more than anything in my estate. You saved me too, Marcus said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. I was drowning when I met you, desperate and hollow. You made me remember who I wanted to be. Diane was crying openly now, her head resting on her mother's shoulder. Owen stood nearby, his jaw clenched against emotion. Victoria's breathing changed around noon. It became irregular, stuttering. Marcus had read enough about dying to know what this meant. The hospice nurse had prepared him. This was the end. I love you, Marcus said, not caring who heard. I love you, Victoria. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for seeing something worth saving. Love you too, Victoria breathed. Her eyes drifted to her roses, to the blue sky, to Diane's face. All of you, thank you for coming back. We never really left, Mom, Diane whispered. We were just lost for a while. Victoria smiled, and then her eyes closed. Her breathing slowed, each breath farther apart than the last. Marcus felt her body relax against him, growing heavier. The last breath came so quietly he almost missed it. One moment she was there, and the next she simply wasn't. The body in his arms was still Victoria, but she was gone. Whatever spark had made her herself had slipped away between one heartbeat and the next. She's gone, Marcus said, and the words felt impossible. How could someone so vibrant, so alive just hours ago be gone? Diane sobbed into her mother's shoulder. Owen turned away, his shoulders shaking. Mrs. Pemberton made a sound like a wounded animal. Marcus just held Victoria and stared at the roses that would keep blooming without her. The days that followed passed in a blur. There were so many decisions to make, so many details to handle. Victoria had pre-planned her funeral with characteristic efficiency, leaving instructions for everything from the music to the flowers. She wanted a simple service she'd written, with honest words instead of empty platitudes. Tell them who I really was, her notes said. Flawed, difficult sometimes, but loved. That's all that matters in the end, that we were loved, and that we loved in return. Marcus worked alongside Diane to arrange everything, grateful for the tasks that kept his hands and mind busy. It was easier than thinking, easier than feeling. He moved through the world like a ghost, performing the necessary functions while his heart remained frozen in that garden, holding Victoria as she slipped away. Jade came to stay at the estate, taking over the guest room and appointing herself as Marcus's keeper. She made sure he ate, forced him to sleep, and ran interference with the constant stream of visitors offering condolences. I'm sorry I doubted you, she said one night as they sat in the kitchen, both of them too wired to sleep. You really loved her. I really loved her, Marcus confirmed. And I don't know how to exist in a world where she doesn't. One day at a time. That's all you can do. Derek visited too, awkward and apologetic. I was wrong about you. About this whole situation. I'm sorry, man. You weren't entirely wrong, Marcus said. I did marry her for money. That was real. But it became something else. Yeah, it became everything. The funeral was held on a Thursday afternoon at the cathedral downtown. The church was packed. Victoria had known more people than Marcus realized, had touched more lives. Her donations, her quiet kindnesses, her sharp wit and sharper mind had left impressions everywhere. Marcus sat in the front row between Diane and Owen, wearing the navy suit he'd worn to that gallery opening 8 months ago. Was it really only 8 months? It felt like a lifetime. It felt like yesterday. Harold gave the eulogy, his voice breaking as he talked about his sister's strength, her determination, her capacity for love even after loss. Victoria lived deliberately, he said. She made choices, some of them difficult, all of them her own. In her final years, she chose companionship over loneliness, love over fear. She chose to live fully until the very end. That takes courage. And Victoria had courage in spades. Diane spoke next, talking about their reconciliation, about wasted years and second chances. My mother gave me the greatest gift at the end, she said, tears streaming down her face. She forgave me before I deserved it. She loved me even when I didn't make it easy. And she brought people into her life who helped her remember what family means. She looked directly. at Marcus when she said that last part. Owen talked about his aunts, business acumen, and her generosity. Mrs. Pemberton read Victoria's favorite passage from Pride and Prejudice. Her voice steadied despite her tears. Several of Victoria's friends shared memories, her laugh, her garden parties, her ability to cut through nonsense with a single withering look. And then it was Marcus's turn. He stood at the podium and looked out at all these people who had known Victoria longer, loved her in different ways. What right did he have to speak? He was the interloper, the man who'd married her for money, who'd known her for less than a year. But Victoria had asked him to speak. Her instructions had been specific. Let Marcus have the final word. He knew me at the end, and that matters. I met Victoria 8 months ago, Marcus began, his voice rough. I didn't know her when she was young, or when she was building a life with Robert. I didn't see her raise Diane or build her reputation in this community. I only knew her at the end. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I married Victoria for the wrong reasons. I was desperate, drowning in debt and failure, and she was wealthy and lonely. It was a transaction, honest, but still transactional. She knew why I was there. I knew why she accepted. We both knew what we were doing. Murmurs rippled through the church. Diane reached over and squeezed his hand, encouraging. But something happened that neither of us expected. We became real to each other. She stopped being a solution to my problems, and I stopped being a means to avoid loneliness. We became friends first, and then something more. She taught me about roses and books and second chances. I taught her that it was okay to be angry at Robert for dying, okay to feel cheated by the time she'd lost. Marcus's voice cracked. Victoria Harrington saved my life. Not with her money, though, that certainly helped. She saved me by reminding me that being broken doesn't mean being worthless, that you can start something for the wrong reasons and still end up somewhere beautiful. That love doesn't always arrive the way we expect it to, but it's still love, still precious, still worth everything. He looked down at his hands, at the wedding ring he still wore. The last thing she said to me was thank you. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for loving her when she needed it most. But I'm the one who should be grateful. She let me be better than I was. She believed I could be more than the desperate man who showed up at that gallery opening. And in believing it, she made it true. Marcus raised his eyes to the congregation, to Diane's tear-stained face, to Owen's solemn nod, to Jade's proud smile. Her silver hair was loose around her shoulders, and she sat in the same chair where Marcus had read to her on so many afternoons. I recorded this 3 weeks ago, Victoria continued, when I was still lucid enough to say what needs to be said. Mr. Blackwell has strict instructions not to play this until all relevant parties are present. So I'm assuming you're all there. Diane, Owen, Harold, Mrs. Pemberton, and Marcus. At the sound of his name, Marcus felt everyone's eyes shift to him briefly before returning to the screen. I'm not going to waste time with sentimentality, though I confess I'm tempted. Instead, I want to explain some decisions that may surprise you, and more importantly, I want to tell you all a story about a man named Marcus Chen. Victoria paused, and a small smile played at her lips. Marcus came into my life at a charity event 8 months ago. He was charming, knowledgeable about architecture, and completely transparent in his desperation. I could see it in his eyes, the fear, the shame, the calculation. He was drowning, and he saw me as a life raft. Marcus wanted to sink through the floor. Hearing Victoria describe it so clinically, in front of everyone, made his original motivations sound even worse than they'd felt. I knew exactly what he wanted when he pursued me, Victoria said. I'm not a fool, and I wasn't blinded by flattery. A handsome man in his 30s doesn't court a dying woman in her 50s out of pure romantic interest. So when he proposed after only 2 months of dating, I knew it was about financial security. And I said yes anyway. Diane's hand found Marcus's and squeezed. He appreciated the gesture but couldn't look away from the screen. I said yes because I was dying alone, and loneliness is a terrible way to spend your final days. I said yes because I'd already decided what I wanted to do with my estate, and Marcus's presence didn't change that. But mostly I said yes because I saw something in him, something he didn't see in himself. Potential. Decency buried under desperation. A good man who'd made bad choices because life had beaten him down. Victoria shifted in her chair, wincing slightly, a reminder that she'd recorded this while already in pain. I want to tell you what happened after we married because it's important. Marcus moved into this house as essentially my employee. I was under no illusions about the arrangement. But then something remarkable happened. He started to care. Her expression softened with memory. He learned about my roses. He read to me when my eyes tired. He held my hand during doctor's appointments and never once complained about the indignities of caring for a sick person. He called my daughter when I was too proud to do it myself, and he gave us the chance to reconcile before it was too late. On screen, Victoria's eyes glistened with unshed tears. But more than any of that, Marcus saw me. Not the wealthy widow, not the dying woman, not the transaction. He saw who I actually was, flawed, stubborn, sometimes difficult, often scared. And he loved me anyway. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face now, but he didn't wipe them away. Diane was crying too, and Owen's jaw was clenched tight with emotion. I know when it changed for him, Victoria said. It was gradual, but there was a moment in February when he looked at me and I saw it clearly. He'd fallen in love with me. Really, truly in love. And he was terrified because he knew how it looked, how it would seem to everyone else. The gold digger who'd caught feelings for his mark? Victoria leaned forward slightly, her gaze intense even through the recording. But here's what I want all of you to understand. Marcus didn't manipulate me. I went into this marriage with open eyes and clear intentions. What happened after, the love we found, the connection we built, that was real. That was gift neither of us expected. And I will not have anyone diminish it or dismiss it as anything less than genuine. She sat back, and her expression shifted to something more businesslike. Now, regarding my estate, Mr. Blackwell will give you the detailed breakdown, but here's the summary. Diane, my darling girl, I'm leaving you the house in Martha's Vineyard and $3 million. Use it to build the life you deserve. Owen, you'll receive $2 million and my shares in Harrington Properties. Harold, $1 million and my art collection, which I know you've always admired. Mrs. Pemberton, $500,000 and a lifetime right to live in the cottage on the grounds if she wishes. You've been family to me for 20 years. Marcus felt his heart pounding. Victoria hadn't mentioned him yet, and he found himself not caring about the money but desperate to know what she'd say about him. About them. As for Marcus, Victoria continued, and everyone in the room seemed to hold their breath. This is where things get complicated. The remainder of my estate, approximately $15 million after other bequests and taxes, goes to him with specific conditions. $15 million. The number was so large Marcus couldn't quite process it. That was more than he'd ever dreamed, more than he'd ever hoped for, even in his most calculated moments. But Marcus, my love, this money comes with a responsibility, Victoria said, her voice firm now. You cannot simply keep it for yourself. That's not who you are anymore, and it's not who I want you to be. So here's my final request, my last wish, the condition of your inheritance. She paused, and Marcus could see the emotion in her face now, the tears she was fighting back. You must use half of this money, $7.5 million, to establish a foundation in my name, the Victoria Harrington Foundation for Second Chances. Its purpose will be to help people like you were when I met you, talented, capable people who've been knocked down by circumstance and need a hand up, not a handout. Support struggling entrepreneurs. Fund education for people who've lost everything. Create opportunities for those who society has written off. Victoria smiled through her tears. And the other half, the remaining $7.5 million, you must use to build something beautiful. Remember that impossible library we talked about? The one with 7 stories and gardens at every level? Build it, Marcus. Build it in this city and call it the Robert and Victoria Harrington Memorial Library. Make it a place where people can dream, where knowledge is celebrated, where beauty and function coexist. Prove that impossible things can be made real if you're willing to try. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. She was giving him everything he needed to rebuild his life, but in a way that would force him to be better than he'd been. She was making him accountable to her memory, to her values, to the man she'd believed he could become. If you refuse these conditions, Victoria continued, The entire estate will be donated to charity and you'll receive nothing. I'm not doing this to be cruel, Marcus. I'm doing it because I know you. I know you're capable of extraordinary things, but I also know you need purpose. Money alone would destroy you. You'd spend your life feeling guilty about how you got it. And that guilt would poison everything good you tried to build. She leaned forward again, her eyes finding the camera, finding Marcus across time and death. But if you accept this challenge, if you build the foundation and the library, if you use what I've given you to help others find their second chances, then you'll have earned this inheritance in every way that matters. You'll have become the man I always knew you could be. Victoria's expression softened one final time. I love you, Marcus Chen. I loved you for making my final months meaningful. I loved you for bringing my daughter back to me. I loved you for tending my roses and reading me stories and holding my hand when I was afraid. And I loved you for being brave enough to admit you came to me for the wrong reasons and stayed for the right ones. She wiped at her eyes, and Marcus could see she was struggling to maintain composure. To everyone else in this room, please don't judge Marcus for how this started. Judge him for what he became. Judge him for the choices he makes from here. I believe he'll make the right ones. I believe he'll honor what we built together. And I believe he'll create something beautiful from the ashes of who he used to be. Victoria stood up from her chair with effort, steadying herself on the armrest. That's all I have to say. Live well, love freely, and remember that it's never too late.